Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm what he was talking about in going rogue. So I truly do apologize. Oh, I didn't read the memo. This is brand new work. This is hot off the press. This is coming out in September. So right kind of wrong. And talking about passion, I'm passionate about failure, which is maybe a little bit sad in a way, but how should I put this? Okay, I'm married to a scientist, so that's where half of this comes from. And I will say that few of us, I mean, all of us, I imagine, are familiar with the concept of DNA. Few of us try to manipulate it to produce life-saving therapeutics. My husband does that, but more focused in my book, Dr. Jennifer Heemstra, who is the first woman to receive tenure in chemistry at Emory, writes about failure quite magnificently. And this is what she does. And this is what her lab does every day. And in any scientific field, failure is part of the journey, right? We're kind of familiar with that idea. But Jen takes it a step further and she says to her students in her lab, we're going to fail all day. What is she doing? She's trying to normalize the concept of failure. She's trying to normalize the experience that, by the way, nobody likes, not even scientists, that many, in fact, most of your experiments, if you're any good, will fail. And why do I say if you're any good? Because that means you're actually out pursuing new territory. So, you know, this is what scientists do for a living. And of course, as you well know, it kind of took off and became something of a craze, even let's call it a fad in management thinking. Now, here's the rub, right? Here is the problem with the failure fad in management thinking. We know deep in our hearts that failure is bad, right? It's one thing to talk about it. It's a whole nother thing to experience it yourself. And so, you know, where do we go with this? Well, here are the sort of the three questions I want to take a look at with you. Number one, I want to be clear about this. I think our confusion about failure is this. We don't take the trouble to distinguish types of failures in a rigorous way. Number two, it is not the case that they're all good, that they're all celebratory. And number three, the really core question that my book seeks to answer is, what's the best way to distinguish the good kind from the not so good? And by the way, a whole lot of work, which I won't talk about today, but how do we prevent the not good kind? That is as worthy a pursuit as the generation of the good kind. So you know, if we want to know what's the good kind, this is like a sneak preview, right? This is a hint from history. This is Edison's famous quote that he may or may not have said, which is, I have not failed. In response to a lab assistant bemoaning the many failures, he says, I haven't failed. I've just discovered 10,000 ways that don't work, right? It's a beautiful quote, and it absolutely hints at the essence of the issue here. But now let me tell you a very brief story from my research. This is actually research from a couple of decades ago on innovation, where I got the chance to study a telecommunications company launching at the time, a radical new service for high-speed internet access. And they were, you know, quite excited about being innovative and all the rest. But, and they were very, very good, right? Highly rated by customers on their regular telephony service. Lots of extensive debate in the sort of executive suite about this new innovation and whether or not to launch it in the very large urban market in which they operated largely. They had a beautiful suburban pilot with well-educated people. It was, I can't even tell you how successful it was. They decided to go for it, you know, to make that big launch. And it was a colossal fiasco. I don't have time to describe all of the details of just how bad this was. Now, question becomes, is this the right kind of wrong? Another question, a more practical question, is why didn't the pilot prevent the failure? That, after all, is the pilot's job, right? To prevent such embarrassing fiascos. And my answer, perversely, perhaps, is because the pilot succeeded. Right? That the right kind of pilot had to be one that failed. So a couple of diagnostic questions here. It should be if your pilot was any good, if you actually learned something because you've tested it in the right representative kinds of situations, you've found the kinks, you've found the things that don't work, and you have made actual changes as a result of that experience. I wouldn't share this story if it weren't for the fact that I have seen it over and over and over. It's a kind of a classic. We have successful pilots and then failed launches. Why? Well, incentives. We can talk more about that. So much more recently, this was a conversation I had with some senior executives in a financial services company where they told me because of the uncertainty, I don't know, it just didn't show up here. Because of the uncertainty, this is supposed to say because of the uncertainty of the context, normally we like innovation, we like failure, but right now it is absolutely imperative that everything go as planned. Okay, I ask you, what do you expect to happen? Well, I don't think it's right to expect perfection. I do think it's possible to expect that you won't hear about the failures that do occur. Right. So I would argue that this sort of idea, which I empathize with greatly, I feel it myself quite often, has a crucial misunderstanding of the nature of reality. Number one, some failure will always be with us. To err is human, after all. Number two, and maybe more importantly, the nature of uncertain times is that this is exactly when we need to be more experimental, more innovative, more trying things out to see what works. And number three, that this sort of avoiding failure isn't an option. The only option is to quickly detect and learn from and move on from failure to have excellence. So forbidding failure, I will argue, is a very good strategy for making sure you don't hear about it. Not such a good strategy for making it go away. Here's the sort of the big answer. The first half of the book is all about the fact that there are three kinds of failure. I just put the first two up here. One is basic failure, where we have a recipe, we have well understood knowledge, and for whatever reason, again, I'm not calling it blameworthy, but things go wrong. And we don't celebrate those. We try quickly to understand what happened. And of course, in well-run operational settings, this is just taken for granted. We learn fast. Complex failures in medicine, they happen all the time. Healthcare delivery, and these are the perfect storms. Right? These are where a number of small imperfections line up in just the wrong way to produce a failure. Again, we don't celebrate them. We do our very best to catch and correct them before things go wrong. And now we draw a line in the sand and get to the good kind, the right kind of wrong, if you will. And these are, of course, scientists' bread and butters, but all of us, finding a life partner almost certainly involves some failures along the way, right? So this is the undesired result of forays into new territory. And let's get even more clear about the right kind of wrong. What does it really look like? I say there are 4.5 attributes or criteria. Criterion number one, it takes place in new territory. You couldn't just look it up. Criterion number two, there is a meaningful opportunity to advance toward a valued goal. Criterion number three, you've done your homework. It's hypothesis driven, hypothesis informed. It's not just guesswork. And number four, maybe most subtly, it's as small as possible. Right? You don't bet the farm. I've got lots of stories of like that in the book where we can't call it intelligent as a result. And the half criterion is, yes, you take the time to learn from it. So let's go back to our senior executives. Essentially, important to know that in new territory, there's just no way around failure. Their notion had to be not failure's not allowed here, but what does excellence look like in a volatile, uncertain world? It looks like do everything in your power through training, through messaging to avoid basic failure, to catch and correct and learn quickly from, mitigate the impact of complex failures, and finally, to celebrate to celebrate the intelligent failures. Sorry that the slides aren't working very well, but here's my last point, which is it doesn't show, so I won't do it, but I'll stop here instead and say most organizations and most of us get this wrong. We fail to appreciate the very real discrepancy between blameworthy failures and praiseworthy failures. As a result, we tend to be afraid of and embarrassed about all of them. What questions do you have?
Well, we've got some very good questions, actually, from in the room. I'm going to put this question to you first. Can you hear me? Is my microphone working?
Yep, I can.
It wasn't earlier. The idea of failing well or fast doesn't always resonate with underestimated workers and learners of color. Failure can often not seem like an option. Can you talk a little bit about how privilege is embedded in this notion of failure?
Absolutely. So first of all, I aim to make some of that gap, maybe all of that gap, go away by being more rigorous and scientific about, again, what's the difference between good failure and bad failure. And you know, good scientists deeply understand this. I want the rest of us to understand it as well. It is an issue. In fact, I do tackle this in the last chapter of the book, which is called Failing as a Fallible Human Being. There is a gap, right? There is a gap in the permission to fail in our society. This is a gap I think we all need to close. I think the way we start to close it is by being a whole lot more clear and scientific and rigorous about what constitutes the good kind of failure. And why it's so important in helping us pursue goals that help all of society, and then get a little bit more transparent and explicit about that gap so that we can close it. I mean, sunshine is the best disinfectant in that respect.
Okay, fantastic. Am I going to risk one more question? Ooh, yes. How can organizations create a psychological safety net for failure?
So I think a psychological safety net, and by the way, I love that question because it shows an appreciation that this work absolutely builds on, you know, that there's a foundation of psychological safety research that underlies this. And a psychological safety net, I believe, is created, one, by clarity about types of failure, two, by explicit invitations to engage in more experiments in safe contexts. You know, the second part of the book talks about self-awareness, situation awareness, and system awareness as the three competencies. And situation awareness is in many ways the most important, because it's saying when there's high uncertainty, great, we got to experiment. But when there's high uncertainty and high stakes or high risk, then we have to experiment in a particularly cautious, safe way. They put pilots in simulators to help them learn how to deal with difficult situations in the air. They don't just send them off, you know, well, see how it goes, right? So we don't always in our lives and in our organizations do a good enough job of carving out those places where the stakes are very, very high, and the certainty is very, very high too. And so we need to create that psychological safety net, both psychologically and literally in simulation type experiences.
Okay, final question. When's the book out?
September 12th, 2023. A long wait.
Fantastic. Amy Edmondson, everyone.